Hi, Sally. Welcome to Ivanti's LinkedIn Live series. It's an honor to have you here today. So,
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you.
absolutely, as you know, October is an Cybersecurity Awareness Month, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. There's quite a bit going on in October, the start of the festive season. If somebody didn't have their pumpkin latte yet, you got to go get one. Make sure you buy some pumpkin spice. So, with that, there's a lot going on, Sally, within the cyberspace and the convergence of AI. So first, why don't we just start with introductions? So I am Srinivas Mukamala, the Chief Product Officer for Ivanti, and I'm honored to have Sally Eves here today. Sally, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, lovely to be here. Pleasure. Really looking forward to this conversation. So I'm Sally Eves. I'm CEO of Tomorrow's Tech Today. I'm also chair of Global Cyber Trust, the Global Foundation of Cyber Studies and Research. Very much involved in this space. Also previous roles as CTO and very much an advisor right across emergent technologies and how they converge together in our age of tech convergence, as I like to call it. So such an on-point subject area. It matters to every single one of us, both at work and at home, doesn't it? It really is very, very on point. So can't wait for the discussion today.
Thank you, Sally. I'll start with this. I mean, Ivanti's mission is everywhere work. And of course, everywhere work comes with multiple challenges and multiple opportunities. I mean, our promise to the world is secure everywhere work. What that means is you should be able to use your mobile, you should be able to use your endpoint, you should be use your rugged devices, you should be able to access the cloud, you should be able to access on-prem. As you can see, the complexity of multi-cloud kicks in. The complexity of mobile kicks in. The complexity of data everywhere kicks in. So, in your view, I mean, in your experience, what are you seeing from a multi-cloud journey, and what's really going on there?
Yeah, so many trends coming together. I mean, that convergence one I mentioned just naturally there, I think is right up there, but also complexity, I think, is the one that brings it all together. But you're absolutely right. We've got the advance of hybrid and multi-cloud environments. We've got industry clouds, I would say, coming of age as well, which has many great benefits, but also adds to some complexity too. Definitely the embedding of zero trust. I'm liking the fact that we've moved beyond some of what we first saw about zero trust, which maybe caused some confusion in some ways because it felt like, you could buy it off the shelf or it was once or done. We've got much more awareness now. So again, realizing this is about principles, it's about culture and education as well. And it's kind of never once and done. I think that's a great thing that I've seen as a growing trend too. But also the range of problems that are being addressed along this journey as well. So moving beyond things like cost efficiency to things more around scalability, agility, but also sustainability too. As you know, a subject close to heart here, but also the rise of cloud native tools and platforms as well. I think if you put this all together, it only came out, I think, last week, but we're looking at 2024, I think 1 trillion market now for cloud computing. First time we've ever hit kind of an area like that. I think it just shows the rising opportunity, the need, but also the opportunity around cloud, and in particular as a service offerings. I think also in particular things around AI and machine learning as additions to this too. I'm sure we'll come on to that a little bit later on as well. Very much topic on point for everybody here, but also underpinning this, I think, things around shared responsibility models as well, and kind of working together more as an industry. So I'd love to come back on that a bit later on too, but more convergence as a sector, which is great to see. The bad actors are doing it at the end of the day. We need to do more of that too.
It's a great point on convergence, right? So when you start looking at convergence, there is a lot of consolidation happening as well. While we are converging, we're consolidating. And you also touched on a very interesting point here. You talked about cloud native tools. That's a little contrary to hybrid cloud. If I'm stuck with cloud native, which is vendor locked in, how do I handle another cloud's tools? So then I have to buy multiple best of breeds, or do I step out and go buy a vendor's technology that actually provides interoperability and integration amongst this cloud native vendor locked in tools? What's your view on that?
Exactly. It was interestingly as well. That was one of the key topics that was coming out from MWC. And again, diversification we're seeing in the sector to offer these tools. And definitely, I think kind of the marriage, for want of a better term, between cloud native and 5G, I think is really accelerating this journey too. So again, a lot more of these conversations are coming around convergence around cloud native, 5G and IoT and what they offer and support one another, which I think is really helping that too. But we also bring to mind, I'm sure when you're talking there, some of the key challenges that I'm being asked about, and I'm sure yourself too on a daily basis. And you mentioned there again about complexity, but I think another thing is the fragmentation challenge as well. I think as part of this journey, we're still seeing a lot of issues around silos, and as part of that, addressing some of the education. I mean, series like this, I think, are fantastic and head on to support this, but also addressing some of the talent gaps we're seeing in the sector too. If you take those collectively, but then as a discipline level as well, whether that's 5G, IoT, cloud native, or particularly in the cybersecurity space, some of those gaps are getting bigger. So again, I think addressing some of the challenges to support this journey, is equally as important as well. So I just wanted to mention that too.
So, what are some of the threats from a cybersecurity standpoint are you seeing, right? I mean, in the last couple of months, you talked about cloud is truly a shared model,
Yes.
right? I mean, we have seen some very interesting nation states target multiple organizations in the United States, right? I mean, of course, a particular very large cloud vendor was named, right? We all know who that is. And we consistently see massive breaches happening on private clouds and public clouds. And we're also seeing, you also touched on software as a service because everybody is moving towards service as a service, right? Compute as a service. Now, software component as a service is becoming a big thing, right? You see identity of the cloud. Today, you don't have to write your identity software anymore. You can actually call a service on an API and do that. So when you start looking at certain what I call swim lanes, what's being asked of you to do, are you seeing customers truly understand what that means?
I definitely think we're seeing awareness rising, but I do think there's differentiators. For example, certain verticals have been more aggressively targeted recently, and again, alongside that, kind of that quest for information to support that acceleration has really been there. Say, energy sector, I think it would be a great example of that. Increasing threats. You mentioned there about nation states, very much attacking that, and also seeing rise to new types of threats as well. For the first time in recent months, we've seen things moving from, say, a malware threat to a killware, looking at utility stations within energy markets. So I mean, that's quite a staggering move forward and quite an alarming one. So again, we have to look at these new threat vectors, where they're coming from, and supporting not just the aggression of how we come together as an industry to support that through technology, but through education too. So I keep saying this about coming together is so important. But yeah, definitely seeing a rise of awareness. But again, certain sectors more than others. Also different vertical sizes. I mean, if you look at the SMB market, for example, so important to the economy, but there seems to be quite a few perception and awareness gaps in terms of, for example, how often you're using AI every day in your activities versus how comfortable and confident you feel with doing that. Actually, it's being used far more often than maybe we feel comfortable with actually doing. So perception and awareness gaps, they're key to override too. And again, making it really known that it's so accessible to get awareness to these tools, techniques, and education offers for organizations of all sizes, particularly SMEs and SMBs, because we've got growing threat verticals there. And if you look at the acceleration of the threats, across supply chains, it's the route of entry in many different cases. So yes, awareness is rising, but I think there's differences in terms of organizational size and vectors there. I think the other thing I'm seeing far more interest now is kind of the new frontier of digital transformation, if you were, which would be about identity management. I think it's absolutely key. Us looking at security from different levels. So, for example, I mentioned MWC, looking at network security. And we've also got to look at things from the processor, particularly when we look at the new levels of AI that's being embedded into chips too. So, it's a pick a mix of things to look at there, isn't there? But yeah, all of those things are on the rise for me in terms of question areas.
So, great segue into that. You talked about AI, you're talking about identity, which is becoming one of the most important things. If you take a look at most attacks, it's coming down to access and authorization, right? Once you give your initial access, am I over privileging? Am I under privileging? Am I really making sure you have the right authorization, right? Every recent attack is clearly ending up in some form or shape in an identity play. On that note, we've been talking about zero trust for a while. In your view, is that just a buzzword? Is it a journey? Is it real?
Journey, I think, and sometimes that's an overused word, though, isn't it? I try to avoid it, but it very much is in terms of the continuous commitment, continuous learning kind of approach to it. But you're right. I think when it first kind of hit the press, so to speak, it did feel like something you can go to a computer store or something like that, buy it off the shelf, put it in your machine, press the light switch, so to speak, and you're protected. And I think that caused a communication gap, but also a comfort or confidence gap as well. Because if you think you've done that thing and you're protected, and you're not continually learning and looking at it again, obviously it creates risk rather than reduces it. But I think there's much better understanding now that this is more, it's about principles, it's a set of values to follow, but it's also about culture, it's around the right change management approach. If we're talking about agile change and reaction to threats, etc., you need something like CI/CD to be agile to react to that too. So it looks at things more holistically. So I think there still is more to do about that. And again, I think maybe particularly targeting the SMB market there around awareness, improving. Things like this, again, really important to get that message across. It's all about that continuous commitment and learning. Again, we're always learning, and you have to undo and unlearn sometimes too. So that commitment to that, I think, is really key. Plus, as an ecosystem as well, I think that's super important.
Fantastic. You touched on another interesting word. When you talk about zero trust, you typically focus on the infrastructure, you focus on your network, you focus on the edge, you focus on your perimeter. We rarely see CI CD in the mix. We rarely see build of materials in the mix. We rarely see the developer. It's an extreme left. You see zero trust more on the extreme right. Right?
Yes.
Let me take care of what do I have today? How do I ensure I start with deny all and then start giving you access where you really need to have, right?
Absolutely.
And when you start taking to a developer world, it's absolutely foreign for
Yes.
most developers. And then when you take it to the data world, I mean, you're pretty much talking about microsegmentation. And then when you take it to the API world, it's another ball game altogether. Are you really seeing some of your customers going that left?
I'm seeing, I think the first word I would say is far more curiosity around this, which is an amazing starting point, because I think it's probably one of the most undervalued kind of skills and kind of mindsets to be in terms of embracing innovation. But the increase over the last 3 months has been significant around this area. And again, it's very notable for some of the in-person events I've been speaking at, and the sort of questions I'm getting at afterwards, and particularly the convergence we're seeing has really propelled this forward. I think there's some gaps here, but certainly the interest and the wanting to move forward is there. I think it's the importance of facilitation along the way that people are looking for, and where to find that trusted partnership to do it. So I think, again, certain verticals, certain organizations more than others. And I'd love to, perhaps as a kind of after thing for our conversation today, we could send and share some links as well about resources to go to and some things I'm involved, including a new hackathon, for example, that's embedding a lot of the principles we're talking about today and getting more people involved in kind of solving these problems hands-on, which I think is massively important too. So I'd love to maybe share about that later too, but it's super important. So I think, we're on that journey. There's a long way to go, and there is differences. So context really does matter on this, but the fact of the questions I'm getting, and also kind of the level of those questions too, is always a massive benchmark for where we're going, if you see what I mean. So I'd love to kind of give a vote for where we're heading there. I'm getting more and more involved in that environment. I'm really enjoying it.
You used an interesting word, context.
Yes.
How much of your customers actually applying the why and the context in their security decisions? I'll give you a simple example. We're talking about zero trust. Posture aware and context aware zero trust goes long ways. You can profile your device, you can profile your user, you can profile what you're running on that, and you can start looking at the security posture, the risk of that piece of code, the risk of the device, the risk of that identity. How do you bring all this together and truly make data centric, constant, context aware decisions? How much are you seeing that, and how are they doing it at scale?
Well, I think, and you've mentioned a couple of times as well, I'd love to draw that into the answer too, almost about the intentional or the purposeful application of technology. Because whether we're talking about, the latest of AI or the latest cybersecurity technique, it's mapping it back to kind of what you and your organization is doing. You have to have that link and use the right, approach at the right time, and also be very holistic about the other areas we've talked about too. So I just wanted to mention that, as a starting point there. And I think the example around Gen AI is a good one too. People I'm seeing doing this well are not just looking at this, what's the latest thing that's coming out and what can we do with that right here, right now. They're taking it back to data. At the end of the day, it's still data as a differentiator. It doesn't matter, what the latest, generative AI aspect might be. If you're not doing the very best with that, whether it's from a security point of view, whether it's around the right access to the right role, right time, to actually do something with that, be more proactive and have that active intelligence, to inform decision making, everything gets back to getting that data right. And then, for example, it's pairing it with the right AI model. And there isn't just one, it's not ChatGPT, obviously it's Llama 2. There's various flavors of this theme. But where I'm seeing this done well is kind of that little pause for reflection and taking it all back to the data as your differentiator. And that applies to, whether we're talking about cybersecurity and the best fit there, or the latest use of AI. And in many cases, we've got a crossover between the two, which is a really interesting one again in terms of question areas. The double header really of AI is an amazing opportunity to make a difference in cybersecurity, but also as a risk vector too. So that might be another question area too, because it's certainly one I think on top of mind for most at the moment too.
Absolutely. So given the time, I'm just going to go with one interesting aspect here. Everybody is going through a massive transformation. Let's call it the big T.
Yes.
Every company around the globe, whether you're an SME, whether you're a Fortune Global 100, you're going through a massive transformation. Whether it's because of the cloud, because of the modern technologies, no code, low code, or whether it's Gen AI/AI. So everybody is on that digital transformation, the word you used. Everybody is going through their own transformation in their own way. When you break down your transformation, they're looking at three key elements. The first one is they're trying to make sure their addressable markets are either static at the best, if not, they're doubling. Because there's no point investing if your total addressable market is not growing, right? When you talk about AI, we're talking $1 trillion market. When we talk software, we talk multi-billion-dollar market. When we talked computers, we said it's going to be a few billions. When we talked internet, we said it can touch hundreds of millions. You can see the transformation. We're not talking billions anymore, we're talking trillions. So you got to have a massive addressable market. That's number one. Then number two, your teams have to be rewired. You got to ensure they're really up to speed on the latest technologies and the reskilling them, right? I mean, I'm not worried about people losing jobs. I think at the rate at which you need to skill, because that's what we did in 2000. I mean, we ensured we skill them in software. I mean, it took us about 5 years to get to a global parity. Today, we don't have 5 years. You got to do that in 5 weeks to 5 months at the best, right? If not, you lose an opportunity. That's your team skilling. The other one is tech. You got to refresh your tech. You're absolutely moving away from legacy technologies to modern technologies. Especially, you're going to write only 10% of the code, 90% will be machine generated. I mean, that's an era we're getting into. So when you look at that massive transformation, and let's focus on AI for a minute, and we'll come back to upskilling your teams, and especially girls and women in cyber as well. The first one, when you look at AI, there is the policy side of AI, there is the security side of AI, and there is truly when it comes to is we talk about safe use of AI or responsible use of AI, right? Because you don't want to be left behind. At the same time, you don't want to jump into AI without knowing what you're doing. So when you start looking at responsible use of AI, where do you see the responsibility of the companies? Where do you see the regulators? Where do you see the researchers who are actually inventing and advancing this field?
Well, I think we've got a great example of it this week, actually, haven't we? In terms of the UK with the inaugural, AI Safety Week and the Safety Summit event that's happening there. And I think it's a good example of the fact that this has to be, it's not just cross vertical. This is truly quite, triple helix, I think you would call it, but it's literally industry coming together of all sizes. We've got to have governments, we've got to have citizens, civil, scientists and things as well, the general public. Everybody has to come together to make a difference here, and all voices need to be heard. That's the biggest thing. Dialogue leads to action. So I think that's a really good start. It's also be very inclusive as well, which is really good to see. So that's a good example of what we can do. I think we should be doing that, and I'm seeing good examples of that more on particular industries as well. I mentioned industry clouds earlier on. I'm seeing some really good activity, not just within organizations, but going beyond that too. Because I mentioned earlier on, one of the biggest threat vectors we're seeing is actually bad actors collaborating more. And they're doing that with sophistication. Their scope is increasing. We've seen bigger threat divergence than we've ever seen beforehand. And part of that is actually around collaboration and their threat intelligence knowledge sharing. What I'd love to see is not just, for example, the AI policies we have at individual organizational level, which is fantastic, but more of those that outreach, for industry level and beyond. I think that's kind of the next level where we can go. And we're seeing some fantastic, research reports that come out that look at the latest in the sector. And I think if we could go beyond, one organization to everybody coming together and sharing that and benchmarking that too on a more regular basis, in the same way as how we work together on developing AI policy as well, and sharing those challenges, I think would be a fantastic step forward. So as part of my guiding principles of responsible AI, it really is that kind of, it takes a village. So I'd love to kind of see more of that approach. My kind of tangible example of this too would be, take the HPC consortium that was put together during COVID. It was a great example of coming together, whether that's from a governance point of view or data science development point of view, coming together about challenges with real acceleration. The innovation curve there was huge, and again around sensitive data, coming together to work on that collaboratively. Let's apply that to other problems like cybersecurity, sustainability. You could go on, couldn't you? But I'd love to see more of that approach, coming together.
So great. On that point, you just touched on UK. There's a ton going on in the United States
Yes.
as well. Our president is absolutely for responsible AI. The United States Senate and the House are also looking at several pieces of legislation, and they're bringing in the industry, they're bringing in the researchers, the academia, with proper representation to ensure that we actually are taking a very balanced approach when it comes to AI and Gen AI and its use. And the real challenge they're addressing is socioeconomic impacts of AI, right? They want to make sure there's nobody left behind, whereas AI will be an enabler and it's going to reduce what we call the economic divide and the digital divide. So that's something policymakers are absolutely keen on. And of course, the security of the AI systems. While we talk about security, they're very interested in the safety in the
Yes.
decision making. Will AI create catastrophes if not paid attention to? And then you can see US has been in the forefront of what's called explainable AI. The DARPA has been investing $2+ billion over the last 4 years. So we can understand AI, we can do attribution, we can also look at the transparency of how the models are assigning weights and then giving the output. So there's a lot going on there. And then you also touched on something interesting. AI and cybersecurity, they become a two-edged sword. The interesting part in between both of them, it boils down to data. In one, you're securing the data, in another, you're using the data to get your outcomes. So, with that said, let's segue into the skills part of it. We're trying to convince minorities and especially women to take STEM as a career. We want them to be in computer science. There's a lot of push across the globe to have proper representation, and diversity and inclusion is a big thing across the globe today, not just in any country. With that, you've been very successful in your career. You have done wonders. You're a CEO by yourself. You've been a CTO. What would be your advice to the young girls?
Well, first of all, I think even just our conversation today reflects this, doesn't it, in terms of what a dynamic space to be. So that is my number one thing in terms of, opportunities you can make a difference in a career. constant change. So if we can help people have the confidence to embrace that change and kind of be agile with it in the way we're talking about technology, I think that massively helps. So first of all, kind of that dynamism. And again, so many skills make a difference. So my starting point is, careers in tech and cybersecurity specifically, it isn't just about technology skills. I talk about the rise of the generalist sometimes, and it's kind of like, I advise to say, have a discipline, but have that kind of, canvas. I love painting, so like a canvas or maybe a big recipe of different flavors or whatever, of ingredients or things you can dive into. So you have that range of skills, because that also builds confidence, but you have a specialism within. So rise of the generalist, as I like to call it. But to go beyond, the STEM that you were talking about there, Shri, to STEAM. So to have that equal value placed on skills around, curiosity, I mentioned earlier, didn't I? Creativity, emotional intelligence, communication skills, get buy-in for your idea, those things are equally important, if more so, given some of the trends we're talking about too. So I advise to, invest in yourself across that breadth and depth of skills as well. There's so many, places out there to get support. Social media sometimes gets a bad rap, but actually it can be a great place for mentoring. That's given a rise for a lot of, mentees myself from that area. So look for communities that kind of revolve around things that interest you. Don't be afraid to reach out for support. I do a non-for-profit series called 365, and that's around visibility of kind of role models in tech, as I like to call it, and beyond. And that is all about this too, because I think visibility matters, and again, it also includes neurodiversity, because I think sometimes when we talk about a diversity in tech, that is an area maybe it gets less explored, and that matters too. And again, applying this back to cyber, if we think about the sophistication of threats, the creativity, frankly, that's involved in some of them, we need the biggest diversity of thought and experience that we can possibly get to kind of dress that head on, shall we say, and get into their minds and think of different things too. So it makes a difference from that point of view as well. And if I may, I'll send some details on this later online, but I published something earlier called the 3 S's. So shared, sustainable, and secure. That was all around AI ethics and kind of responsible development in this field. So I'd love to share that. Plus there's a new hackathon opportunity. So I'd love to share, details outside of that, but it's all about this, hands-on tech practice, reaching out to new talent and getting involved kind of, from the chip up in this particular case, but it's all about that coming together. And that's my biggest love about this. And also a new cybersecurity book for kids coming out too, which is very much kind of explainability, literally from youngsters up, which is really important too, because this affects everybody, doesn't it, from the youngest age.
What's your final departing advice for students when they come and say, hey, I'm thinking about computer science versus mechanical engineering or electrical engineering?
I would never say one over another, because I'm very I think that again, go with your heart to a degree, in terms of what you're really interested in, what your passion are, but where you want to go, and look ahead to get advice around that. So kind of look ahead at what role do you see yourself doing, speak to people in that role ahead of you, if you see what I mean, and look at that next step ahead, because people will be really happy, virtual or otherwise, very often to have that coffee with you and have that chat and kind of look where you might want to be, and that conversation might reveal something else about that role and might make you think, actually maybe that isn't for me, but maybe that is the one that's for me. So definitely have those conversations when you're making those choices too, because I think that massively helps. And again, I think we've seen this more than ever. There's always opportunities to pivot, and I think that's a very good thing too. So the other big skill I would say is, be pragmatic. Again, having that confidence to adapt as things adapt around you is really important too. So again, never be afraid to reach out. And again, if something doesn't work, there's always another opportunity. So go and go again. I'd always say that. Never give up, go again. And there will be something that's right for you. And that range of skills, I can't emphasize it enough. This is not just about development and coding. It's so much more than that. And you could have that right skill set for a team. We need that pick and mix. We really do. It makes all the difference in the world. So yeah, go for it, I would say.
Thank you, Sally. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to have you on our Uvanti's LinkedIn live series. Again, our goal is to share our knowledge with fellow leaders and bring the best to the viewers. Again, thank you all. Have a great year ahead and a great holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you all.